All right. There we go. So yeah, once again, thank you so much for having me. I know many of you will listen to the online translation, so I speak relatively fast. I'll try to slow myself down. So what am I going to talk about? So we are in 2023, and DevOps is now a well-established thing. And one of the questions that I get asked very, very often is it still a thing? And shouldn't we have something better now because DevOps is well and truly done? And I want to make my case in this talk that I think that DevOps will have a lasting impact on how we do work. So let's go through this. So, that's my first technical problem. It used to work literally 5 minutes ago. So we'll try that again. So while the slides are coming up, one thing that you would have noticed is that every couple of weeks, couple of months, there's a new term coming up. SRE, platform engineering, MIOps, AIOps, the DevNetOps, you can name it, right? And any of those things gets positioned as this is the next new thing. And you know, we keep coming back to it's not. Because what DevOps does is it's an umbrella term in my view. The goal of DevOps has always been to make things better. And so no matter what all these different buzzwords are going to be, we're going to be here talking about DevOps, and DevOps Days are going to go a long, long way to bring these different things to the conference. So as you would have seen on the slides, the way that I define DevOps for myself is really a lot more about we're having all these different tools and technologies and processes that make our tool belt. Yeah, so we have problems that we see in our organizations with our development processes, and what we're going to do is we're going to use all these different things we learn to put a new tool into our tool belt. And then when the problems appear, we have more tools to choose from. And that is what I find amazing about the DevOps community. We've never really defined DevOps. Like, there's no DevOps manifesto, not like in the Agile world. Right? There's no specific definition for DevOps. And I think while in the beginning people always saw that was a weakness, I think that's a strength, because it allows us to be flexible. Right? And if you've read the Phoenix Project or the DevOps Handbook or any of these other books, you would have noticed that they approach this very similarly. Right? There's plenty of like overlapping definitions, there are overlapping concepts, and that's good, because we really try to solve our problems here. Now, how are we going? Right, it used to work. So what that then means is because we are not so concerned about the specific definition, we are, as the DevOps community, we're not getting into the same kind of culture wars that you sometimes see in the Agile world. I'm not sure how much you have experienced it, but I've certainly seen it in quite a few organizations, how the scaled Agile framework versus Scrum versus less versus whatever are arguing what is the true Agile framework. Right? We don't have these fights in DevOps, and I hope we will never have them, that we're not arguing that SRE is better than platform engineering, is better than DevSecOps. Yeah? And I think that really truly differentiates us and allows us to solve the bigger problems. Because what we are here for is to solve, or to really make IT delivery a nice thing. I come from an engineering background. So as I mentioned, I did an AI degree many, many, many years ago. And for me, it was always the most frustrating thing is all this kind of drudgery in the process, where you do something very repetitive, something that doesn't add value. Yeah? And if you do that, like, you just, like, I have to point at the computer. There we go. Now we have to catch up on the slides. So these are all the buzzwords that we mentioned before. We had this slide where we introduced myself. Like, this is the one with the tool belt. This is the one where I said I break silos and I solve problems. That's part of what, when I talk about the definition of DevOps, that's really what I think it should be. And this is the side where I said, like, we don't have these kind of culture wars, which I think is really important. I'm not sure how many of you get this cultural reference. This is Monty Python's. But it's Like, and when I look at the Agile community, I very often feel like that. So here, the thing basically says, are you the Judean people's front? And the people are completely like, well, no. We are the people's front of Judea. And you can see from the language there, right, it's very much the same. And this is what I feel like when the Agile guys are arguing, this is not truly Agile. Like, it's just, like, it's wasteful energy. Like, we should focus that energy on solving problems. All right, and now, now we've caught up. I just need to stand a bit back here. Okay, so what is then the purpose of all the good DevOps stuff that we talk about? At the end of the day, you have something that looks very similar to this in most organizations, right? You have some kind of delivery teams, and they're ideally agile delivery teams. At the bottom here, you see the customer. That's ultimately, we're doing it for customers, right? So if you don't have a view of how the customers work and what they need from us, then we don't know what problems to solve. And then here I use these two terms, but you can replace them with others, platform engineering and SRE. Now, in the old world, you could have perhaps talked about, you would have had one more dev, one more ops, but those concepts still exist because there's an aspect of DevOps that focuses on delivering things faster, and they have these kind of delivery metrics. And there's an aspect of DevOps that is about keeping something running. Yeah, and at the old ops aspect. And that is much more about service level objectives. So these are the two things that we continuously bring together in our community to solve both problems. How do we quickly and reliable deliver something? And how do we make sure that this stuff still works? Yeah, and I'm sometimes a bit discouraged when I go to specific conferences or talks when the focus is purely on one side, because at the end of the day, DevOps was never just about the CD pipeline, and DevOps is also not just about monitoring. So we want to bring this together. The goal of all this, to bring this back to where I was a moment ago, is we want to make life better for the engineers. Yeah, so bring me back to myself 20-odd years ago. I had to do a lot of this myself. Right? I was, and this will age me, but I was writing COBOL on the mainframe. And that is not a very fancy technology, so I had to write literally in the text editor my code, and then I would have to transfer it into the mainframe, and then in the mainframe you would compile it, and then you get a syntax error, and you go back, and you have to kind of fix it in your text editor again. So there's a lot of drudgery, and it takes an hour to get a cycle done. Now, that's what we want to avoid. We want to be able to just focus my energy, the developer's energy, on solving problems. Yeah, so we want to create these autonomous, agile delivery teams that have all the capabilities to be successful. Now, that's an easy thing to say. Like, we want our teams to be autonomous. Let them just make their own decisions. Let them choose their own tools. Let them choose their own processes. That sounds good. Now, I'll give you an analogy. So, I have a 6-year-old at home. I want him to become a very responsible adult at some stage. If right now I send him into the kitchen and say, have a meal, he's going to go straight to the cookie bar. Right? He's going to eat gummy bears. And if I would be really unlucky, he goes to the cupboard where there's all this kind of colorful washing liquid. Right? That's dangerous, and that's not because he doesn't want to do the right thing, but he doesn't have the context yet. So one of our jobs is to make it safe for these teams to do what is right. Yeah? And that means you can't just go to a team and say, you're now fully autonomous, you're now an agile team, you're now a DevOps team, you're all good. Because that team never had to worry about security because it was a security team. They never had to worry about infrastructure because it was an infrastructure team. So now just saying it's yours is irresponsible. Right? And so as my job, I see as a DevOps person, is to make sure that this is safe. Yeah? And I think that's where platform engineering can go a long way. And there's this beautiful thing that I've learned from a friend, Manju. He defines platform engineering with his acronym CAMS. And I think that's really nice if you want to take that away. It's like, what should a developer platform looks like when we take DevOps into consideration? The C stands for consistency and cognitive load. So you can take either one. Consistency means whatever I do through this platform is always going to return the same. So I don't have to worry about people following different processes, different teams following different processes. I'll have consistency. Cognitive load stands for, I have to worry about something, right? And that's really where we're trying to make sure that the teams don't have to worry about all these aspects of, do I know which specific server and what CPU and how much memory and all those kind of things. They shouldn't have to worry about that. The A stands for automation. I think that's pretty straightforward. We want to automate as much as possible through our processes. The M stands for manage it as a product. And this is a pet peeve of mine. Like, there are DevOps teams or support teams out there that basically build an amazing automation, and then they just expect everyone to just pick it up. And honestly, if you are a technologist who has been working with older technology, let's take the mainframe like myself, and now I'm getting this really fancy new platform, I don't necessarily have the skills to use that, right? So unless we're managing this as a product where people say, okay, there's a new customer, how can I onboard this customer onto my platform? I'm missing a trick. And also, I shouldn't build the automation that I think is really cool. I should build what my customers, in this case, the developers in the organization, actually need. Yeah, so you want to manage it as a proper product. And then last but not least, you need to build the security in it. To my example earlier, most teams just don't know how to assess security. It is not terribly intuitive. And that means we need to build this in so that whatever components they use and processes they follow are already have security built in. Yeah, so that's kind of the platform engineering side. And I just thought that that's a useful kind of first view of this. So if we're doing DevOps right, and we're doing it like this, there's a long way for us to go. All right, so let's talk a little bit about transformation. So transformations usually look like this, right? So we have this kind of current state. We have a future state that we want to achieve, which is we want to be DevOps, we want to be agile, we want to be in the cloud, we want to be digital. And then the transformation brings you from A to B. That sounds very intuitive. Unfortunately, it's false. And I want to make my case with you on why I think this is false. So the first one is the as is. It should be relatively easy for an organization to say, here's what we are. Like, here's where we stand, here's the technologies, the capabilities we have. Now, let me challenge that a little bit. So this is from a book quite a while ago from the 90s about software quality. And what they've done is they went to an organization, many organizations, and they interviewed people. So they went to the very senior folks and asked them, of the best practices, how many of them are you using? Right? And they said like 68. Right? And then they went to the directors, to the managers, all the way down to the engineers. When they got to the engineers and asked the same question, like the engineers said like 12 of them. So you can see there's a huge disparity if you ask the organization like where they are at. At the top, they see it very different to at the bottom. And that is not necessarily because at the top people are less intelligent. It's just that it's very nuanced. Like if you look at DevOps practices like continuous integration, there's no binary yes or no. Like there's certain part of the organization that are a little bit better than others. So the as-is question is not easy to answer. Now this was in the 90s, and you might say, wait a second, like we've come a long way since then. So if you look at the State of DevOps report, and you just ask across the same kind of grouping, how good are you with the adoption of DevOps? You see a similar data here, right? 58% of the C-suite says we are really good at it. 37% of the engineers would agree. Right? So you still see this disparity, and it's even in the cloud world. Right? And this I found amazing. So if you at the Accelerate reports, when you ask the organization, are you using the cloud? 67% says they're using the cloud. When you then ask them, the cloud is defined by these 5 things. Elasticity, direct access, a global network, et cetera, that falls down to 22%. And it shows you of how much misunderstanding is out there. So if our goal would be to adopt the cloud or adopt DevOps, it's very difficult here to determine what that to-be state would be because we don't even know what our as-is is. So we really need to worry about the problems we are solving and not these buzzwords. So what that then translates into is that rather than this kind of as-is towards to-be, which looks a bit like this, right? We have a problem state in the red, and then we want to get to an end state in the green, and all we need to do is this transformation. You would normally get into these kind of cycles, right? So we're going to do our transformation, then we become more cost-conscious, and we start cost-cutting until the business or the stakeholders decide, this is not working for me, So they bring in the next team, we're doing another transformation, another round of investment, we go back up, and the cycle keeps returning. This is absolutely beautiful for consultants like me, because I can keep coming in and keep helping every time. But for an organization, that's not where you want to be. As an organization, you want to be in this. Yeah? And that is hard for organizations because you can't go to an executive and says, I just need 3 months of doing this, or a year, or whatever, because it doesn't stop. So you're telling them that this kind of DevOps transformation is something ongoing. Like that's the equivalent of me going to my doctor because I'm a bit overweight and have a bit of high blood pressure, and I go there and I hope that the doctor is just going to give me a pill, or a diet, do the cabbage diet. But what he's going to tell me is exactly what I have to tell my bosses and my clients is, there's no magic answer. Like from now on, Mr. Herring, you have to eat healthier and do more workouts and sleep well, and you have to do this for the rest of your life. In the same way, I have to go to organizations and says, no, you have to keep working on this for the rest of your organizational life, and things will be different. The problem you're solving today is different to the problem you solve in 3 months. The tool belt, remember, our tool belt is changing. That means we'll have different ways of solving problems. And there's no good reason to just move from one to the other. Right? So you really need to think about what problems you solve next and which parts of the tool belt you use for that. So the pathway then is really, it's like you choose your own adventure. Yeah? So because it's not a predetermined path from as is to 2B, and everyone has their own problems to solve and has their own toolkits, that means everyone is basically has their own adventure. But if you have in your organization 20 teams and they all have their own adventure, that makes it really difficult to understand, like very different to govern. So you can't just have free flow, you have to have some guidelines. And what I want to argue for is that what we want to provide our teams is the guidance but not the instruction. Now let me help you with an analogy. The old transformation where you have as is and 2B state, that's very similar to in the early days of the internet. If I wanted to go somewhere, I went to the internet, I went to a map website, and I said I want to go from Australia to Colombia. I would print up this pathway, and then I would start on this journey. The problem with that is, as you all know, as soon as you get distracted somewhere, the whole kind of printout goes away. Right? So this old world kind of map that you would get was terribly useful as soon as the first obstacle came in my way. Right? And I don't know how many of you had this experience, but I've been many times on these where like halfway through I was completely stuck, and then it took me 3 times as long because I just got lost. And that's, to me, is the same, where transformations fail because people believe they can predict it. And you can't predict it. So you need to have a different approach. So the real transformation look a lot more like these networks. Right? There's kind of very complex ways to go through this. So you might as well not think about everything. But what you want to provide your team with is a compass. Because a compass will allow the team to make their own decisions in the right direction towards the right goal. And not just randomly walking around. And I think that's the difference. So how can we provide this compass? So one is you can define common goals. Right? And you see 2 different ones here, and I will show you a couple more. The top one is something that I learned in university. So I'm not sure how many of you, does anyone here recognize what that left top thing is? The left top picture? No. So this is from a computer game called, from a PC game called Civilization. And what this is a technology tree. So in that game, you basically build up technologies, and it allows you to explore and research new things. And what that means, if you wanted to be a spacefaring nation, then first you had to learn language and science and mythology and those kind of things before you would then being able to build wheels and build engines and at some stage build rockets. And on the right-hand side, you see the same principle for continuous delivery. All the boxes on the right top are capabilities you require to do continuous delivery. And that looks a bit big, but think about it. For continuous delivery, you have a lot of things that go into the different build processes, the test processes, the being able to deploy, being able to stand up an environment, the source control management. Right? So each of these things there show you the same thing, and shows you the relationship between them. So each team, you can give this piece of paper to each team, and they can all chart their own pathway through this. What capabilities do they have? What dependencies do they have to resolve? And so they can do their own. The little yellow bulbs, just for your information, those yellow ones were common capabilities. So those were the capabilities of the organization we had to provide. The bottom con is trying to do the same thing in a different format. It's an enterprise DevOps bingo card. Again, as an organization, we determine these are the capabilities we want, but we can't tell each team which things to do first. So we allow each team to determine which of these fields they want to fill in next. Yeah, and then that can be in either the team already knows, or you help them, right, with the discovery process. You help them understand where their problem space is and what is the right next thing to try. Yeah, and then you can start filling this all over time. It gets a bit more complicated when you start thinking about not at the team level, but at an organizational level. And this is a view from an organizational level. It's not really a technology tree. It's not really a bingo card, but it's a similar concept. Like we call it the honeybees. But the principle here, that you see 5 dimensions. You see project to product, which is really the kind of verticalization of an organization where we move away from projects into standing teams. You have modern engineering, which has all the good DevOps stuff in it. You have talent transformation, and that is crucially important, as I discussed before, because the teams need to be able to pick this up. Giving them new tools doesn't mean they can use them well, right? So there's a lot to be said about the training strategy, how the roles change, and how we kind of enable that culture. And then on the right, you see 2 other dimensions. There is the business and IT strategy, making sure that those 2 align. And then you have living architecture. And architecture is so crucial, because if you have a big monolithic system, even if you automate it, it's still going to be slow, right? And if you have a microservice architecture that is a lot more nimble, then you can be a lot faster. But you have different capabilities that you then require because you need to control it. Like rather than having one big system, you have 1,000 microservices. You can imagine that there's a different level of control that you have to have. So again, with this kind of diagram, you can then allow the organization to determine which things they're going to invest in next. Knowing that if you're only filling in the architecture part, you're still not going to be successful. Because what it comes down to is that there's these kind of 3 systems in an organization that fall into another like gears. You have the architecture, you have the engineering capabilities, and then you have the organizational structure, the governance, and the org structure. Because imagine this, and I've seen this in many organizations. You're going to do an agile transformation. And all you're doing is you're training everyone on agile, you're going to do stand-ups, you have post-it notes on the wall, all that goodness. But none of the capabilities have changed, and you're still working with the same architecture. Now what that means is you can't actually control your own destiny. Right? You have dependencies against everyone. You don't have test automation in place. You don't have your own environments. Well then, why am I a team and why is this different to before? All we've done is we're now standing up and we're writing things on post-it notes. So you can speed up any of these gears, but only a little bit, and then you have to catch up. And I was in an organization a few years ago that introduced microservices. So they had done the architecture bit. They basically broken down their system into many different microservices. And they were really struggling because they had none of the automated testing in place. They didn't have the monitoring in place to understand when a microservice started failing. And so for them, it got out of control. Yeah? So each of these gears you can speed up. But you have to then look at, okay, I've sped up the engineering capability. Now, what do I need on the architecture side to really take advantage of that? And what do I need to change on the governance side to really make sure that this starts working? Yeah, and then you choose the next one, and and this time we're speeding up the architecture a bit more, and now we need extra capabilities to control that. So it's really important to think about that in organizations, because if you don't, you get something that's called cognitive dissonance. And this cognitive dissonance means like my boss keeps telling me that I'm empowered, that I'm an autonomous team. But I still have to get my infrastructure from the infrastructure guys. I still have 15 snow tickets to create. Like, I can't make any decisions. At some stage, you're going to fall back, and you're going to say, you know what, screw this. Like, this didn't work. Like, this agile thing, this DevOps thing is not working for me. And that's because you haven't actually sped up all these gears at the right pace. Yeah, and then things get a bad word, a bad reputation, and you're all falling back into the old behaviors. All right. So all of this comes together in an overall flow, as you can imagine. It's one of the challenges, and obviously is bringing this into a DevOps flow. It's an eye chart. I don't necessarily want you to read it. It will be in the slides that we will distribute it. But what it shows you is that you need to bring these different worlds together. Yeah, and you can see there's a DevOps team on the right-hand side, and you have these kind of two different things coming through, which are the stuff that you can build in an agile fashion, like with sprints and so forth, and the stuff that comes back from production. Coming back all the way back to the earlier slides of there's always a dev and an ops component, and they behave different. A Jira ticket is different to an incident ticket. And we need to make it possible for our teams to deal with that. I've just recently started exploring with Atlassian on how you can make this a seamless dashboard for any kind of team member so that they look the same, but they behave differently. Because obviously, if you get an incident, you need to be on a bridge, you need to escalate and call people, while if it's a normal Jira ticket, it will just get planned over a release and a sprint, etc. So I'll leave you at the end with the that's a great exploration of all the things we need to consider, but then how on earth do we know that we're actually making progress? And that's going to be, that's a $5,000 question, right? Because if I said there's no end state, there's no specific duration, like how am I ever going to get funding for this? And if I get funding, how do I justify it afterwards? Right? And so these are a couple of executive questions that I use in my executive training, where I tell people, like, these are capabilities your organization should have. And you can ask for that, right? So you can ask your team, like, okay, we're investing in DevOps, so can we blow away our environment and rebuild it from our source control? And if you can, fantastic. If not, there's a problem for you to solve, a very tangible thing that you can ask for, and they can demonstrate it, right? And the same is true for the other questions here. The goal is to use this as an objective assessment that an executive can use. Yeah? Some executives are a bit more, let's say, quantitative, and this wouldn't necessarily flow. So this is the kind of balanced scorecard that I would use. It has 4 quadrants, and the specific metrics you see here don't matter as much as you should have something in each quadrant. The top left is business effectiveness. So this is why we're here. This is why we're doing DevOps. Like, we want to put features into production quicker and reliable. And what I call that, like, it's experiment and expand. I want to quickly get something into production, and if it's good, I want to use it a lot. Yeah, I want a lot of my customers to use it. So things that you measure there is like how many experiments you run per time period, how quickly you can scale up, and whether or not you use all the features that are being used, that are being delivered. On the right top, you have delivery efficiency. So that's the traditional speed up and automate. Things like cycle time and how many manual steps you are removing. Bottom left is operations reliability. So this is can I sense whether my system is working well? And here would be traditional monitoring stuff, but much more is business process monitoring. Like, does my login functionality still work? Can I still create an account? Can I still make a transaction? Can I still buy something? Right? Because your goal in that quadrant is that our automation finds a problem before the customer. Yeah, so one of the key metrics that I always look for is how many problems were found by our system and how many problems were found by our users. And I want the vast majority to be found by our system. And then the bottom right is architectural flexibility. This is a kind of living architecture part. So how many of our transactions are using our new microservice architecture versus our old monolithic system? How many outdated components do I have? And technical debt can also be measured in there. Yeah, so again, it gives you this view that DevOps is not one thing. DevOps is something where we are trying to solve problems, and each problem is unique to your context. So understanding your context, you can then determine the right metrics, measure them, and move on. Like, at some stage, you will change it. You've solved this problem. Fantastic. Keep monitoring it, but now add a metric for your next problem that you're trying to solve. Yeah? And sometimes you will do something for delivery efficiency that makes your reliability worse. Right? And that's totally normal. You now then just need to start figuring out, okay, so what do we do? Do we revert it back? Or do we do something new that will improve both? So with all that, I think DevOps is still well and truly alive. Many years ago, when I started my role, in my very first performance evaluation, I wrote in there a target that says, I will make DevOps available everywhere, and then I will go on and do something different. Well, to this day, I have this objective still in my performance review that says, at some stage we will have DevOps everywhere, and I can stop doing that. And I have now resigned myself to think, that will never go away. Because there's always going to be new problems to solve. With the cloud, a whole bunch of new problems came to solve. Lots of opportunity, lots of new problems. And every other technology and every other practice and trend will do the same. So thank you so much for having me. I hope you could take one or two things away from this. And yeah, once again, like, it's so lovely to finally make it here. Thank you.